We ain't throwing starfish here, now we're having a good party. Talking about structural change. We believe the land is sacred, even beneath that vacant parking lot. But the weeds are doing their best to express the need for something different. Gonna make some space for you and me to live here all together. Gonna make it safe and fun for kids to get around the town. Gonna find me a residential pedestrian district where I can gracefully grow older. Gonna spend my remaining years sharing Boulder.
Hello, Boulder and the wider world. This is the Sharing Boulder podcast. My name is Philip Ogren, and for episode 49, I spoke with Ren Q. Daw, who is a trans activist, comedian, writer, and educator who lives and works in Boulder and has been performing his comedy all over the Front Range. I have mentioned a few times in passing that I enjoy performing comedy, but I've never said much else about it on this podcast. So it was especially fun for me to have a chance to explore the world-changing power of comedy with Ren in this interview. In this episode, Ren talked about his personal experience with housing insecurity and touched on possible ways we could think about approaching solutions with more empathy and with an increased focus on harm reduction by creating safe spaces for the most vulnerable among us. On this podcast, we have talked about policies for addressing these challenges with many guests, and my intuition in that moment was not to try to cover that territory right then and there. I felt Ren's testimony spoke for itself and didn't need additional commentary from me about specific policy proposals. If you are interested in diving further into this subject, then I'd like to encourage you to check out episode 44 with Dan Williams, where we talked about low-barrier services for unhoused people. Dan pulls no punches in this short and thought-provoking interview, and I hope you will check it out. Content warning. This episode features significantly more swearing and adult-oriented content than most Sharing Boulder episodes, and may not be suitable for young children. In our conversation, we forgot to mention that Ren will be hosting a show in December produced by Longmont Out Loud that I will also be performing in. The show is called Escape from the Holidays, and tickets are now on sale for the evenings of December 8th and 9th at longmontoutloud.com. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Ren Q. Daw.
And right at that moment, I look up and I see that there is a man basically 6 feet away from me. This old man walking his tiny little schnauzer dog, and he is looking at me, and I am looking at him, and he is looking at me, and like an adult, I run away. So now there is, some old man that really thinks that dickless goblins are roaming those. Newest gender just dropped. Weird, lame cryptids. That's great, y'all. Happy Pride to me and in the audience. Pride Month, y'all. Not actually my favorite month. Sloth Month, Gluttony Month. That's really more my speed. We're a fast crowd. I have to be careful of around where I'm talking about pride activities, right? Because I am proud, right? I am mountain proud, and I am a boy, right? But I am not a proud boy. Not the right one, right? And joke's on me, right? I transitioned, and now we're just a white guy. That's just what it is. I had someone at work recently, and I'm out at work. I wear this type of clothing to work. Would a Republican wear this? I don't know. Maybe that's closed-minded, right? Republicans can be twinks too.
And I don't have ambition. I don't have youthful vigor either. I'm just sort of I don't have big hopes and dreams. I just my biggest goal in life is I'm trying not to be a dick. That's yeah. Well, it's been hard. It's been hard because I've had a few false starts. To give you some sense of that, I grew up in a really conservative Christian family, and we attended a small Bible church. And I'm not about to bash my family in front of this particular audience, but here's what I learned as a teenager. Just because you love Jesus, and just because you don't want to see your friends and family and everyone that you've ever met to burn in hell for all of eternity in a lake of fire, it doesn't make you not a dick. In fact, if you spend your time worrying about other people's eternal salvation, it's actually a pretty good sign that you are one. So if this happens to apply to you, please go home and think that one over carefully.
Ren Q Da, welcome to Sharing Boulder. Thanks so much for being here today. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, please introduce yourself for a minute or two.
Hi, y'all. My name is Ren. My pronouns are he and they, and I am a comedian. I am a trans activist in the area. I do a good bit of community organizing, and I'm an educator, and I work in the higher education space. And I'm also Philip's friend.
Hey, yeah. Well, I know you mostly as a comedian, and you've been in a couple of my shows, which is a big honor. We had 2 shows up in Niwot this summer. That was really fun.
They were really fun.
And then I've seen you many times at the at Vision Quest, where we do the open mic. So that's how we know each other. But I was also in your play this summer.
You were
the Cold Wars.
Yes, the breakout star.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, you got to play Sid Hatfield, which was one of my favorite. That was part of the reason I wrote the show, is because I got very I don't know if this makes sense, historically enamored with his story, and just the story of Matawan and yeah, it was really fun to see you lean into that role. It was a great time.
That was really fun. So it was like community theater. I mean, it was community theater, but just to explain, just to explain, it was a scripted reading. So we all had the books in front of us. We rehearsed 3 times.
Yep.
And then the first show was kind of a rehearsal, and the second show I felt like it came together really well.
Too.
It was
I think
really fun. It was really emotionally impactful for me to
likewise.
Get to do that.
It was so fun.
Really cool. All right. Well, so what the thing I wanted to kick off with was the Queer Comedy Festival. What was it called? Boulder Queer Comedy Festival?
It was the Colorado Queer Comedy Festival. Okay. It was the first statewide queer comedy festival that Colorado has ever had, which is super neat. And it just kind of started out as as all things, right? It's just purely an idea of just being man, we know so many queer comics around here, and they're having a hard time kind of booking these bigger gigs because either it's you're too queer or you're not queer enough, or it's you get tokenized. And so it's just, they just don't make the cut. And I think that they're hilarious, but maybe this humor isn't every, white guy's humor. And so it's not landing in the same way. And so we were just what if we just threw our own festival? What if we just did it? And I made a Google form, and then we just did it.
That's so cool. And you had backing from out.
Yeah. So we got sponsored by Out Boulder County. And that was amazing. Out Boulder is a local nonprofit organization that works in LGBTQ advocacy and servicing. So they help people with housing resources. They help people with medical resources. They have vaccine clinics that they run out of their location. And then they also do a lot of really wonderful recovery programming, arts programming. They have some really cool queer open mics. And so they were sure, let's do this. So that sounds like Queer Joy. We're in.
Cool. Well, the show was at the Junkyard Social,
yes.
And it was a packed house, and the energy, it was electric. I mean, I had so much fun. I had a lump in my throat half the time because it was just so cool to see all that positive energy focus there. It was so it was really sweet and very funny, but it was also raucous and fun too, you know? And it was just when you came out and everyone cheered, and it was just the house was shaking. It was just so fun. And what was really neat about it is because I've seen you perform a bunch. And so I know that you were present. You weren't off somewhere else. You were there enjoying that moment. Is that true?
It's so interesting. Yeah. You literally came. So I've been side note, I've been working really hard on doing the thing that you're supposed to do, which is meditate every day and journal about your emotions. And I'm really trying, right? Really trying. And I'd been doing that leading up to the show. And It's so funny because after the show you came up to me and it was like you were noticing yourself having a good time on stage. And I was like, wow, it's the meditation really be paying off, because that was exactly the intention.
Okay,
yeah.
Good. So that's how you felt about it.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. And I only went to the first show. It was a completely different lineup. The
That's
second
right.
night,
Yeah, different lineup.
Was it a good show? The second, on
Yeah,
Saturday?
it was definitely it was a super different vibe, but really fun and interesting. So, and also my sets were different too. So I had two complete. So if people came and bought weekend passes, they would get an entirely different show both nights, which was cool. So yeah, entirely different lineup. The the night of that show, it was like the first snowstorm we had in Colorado this year, this autumn.
On Saturday.
And that Saturday night. Okay. And I mean, it was like brutal outside. It was very snowy. The roads were very treacherous. And I was like, I was going to be like, I thought like, no one's going to show up, and like, we can't cancel it. So we'll just do what we can. Still had like 100 people in there. Still had a full house. I was like, wow, y'all are wild, but okay.
That was so cool. That was so cool. Well, I had such a blast. My wife was with me, and she was just belly laughing, you know. The woman, who was the woman who got up, who came out as lesbian in her 40s, and she started off with a joke about she looks like the kind of woman who would offer to breastfeed your baby on the bus. Sunshine
Homes. Oh my goodness. She's such a hoot.
She was just amazing. Yeah.
She's got such a goofy energy too. And I think that's something that I really miss in a lot of like modern comedians, like caricatures of themselves, if you will. Like they get a little too serious, and they're kind of like a cool guy who's just trying to say funny things in a cool way. And like Sunshine's not afraid to be like, I'm gonna make some duck noises on stage right now, you know.
Have a few raspberries or something. Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, she was really good. No, I think I kind of suffer from I'm not as emotional. I don't express as much emotion on the stage as I'd like to. Like I have to, like when I'm practicing, I try to like get out of my I'm like right now I'm in kind of like podcast voice mode, you know.
You have a good podcast voice. I was like just thinking about that. I was just like, wow, this is like perfect podcast.
Thank you. Anyways, well, I wanted you on the show on the podcast because I've mentioned comedy a few times just in passing, and never really dove into it. And this is just like something I'm really passionate about. So it's not really related to the theme of the podcast per se, but I just like have this conviction about comedy as a world changing medium for getting people to think things differently, think about things differently. I have a close friend. Well, I have an older brother. Let's put it that way. He may not. He probably won't listen. He probably won't listen to this. He probably won't listen to this episode. But you know, I have an older brother who is like, I don't really like comedy because I don't like the way it leads you into laughing about things I don't want to be laughing about. And I've been thinking that one over. You know, like because like he's much more conservative, and I think the notion that comedy pulls you out of your comfort zones or out of your ways of looking at the world into other people's ways of looking into the world in ways that like it's uncomfortable, right? And that's part of why we laugh about it, is because it's like comedy.
We don't know what else to do with it.
Comedy can be so challenging, and the way you approach comedy is so wonderful because you come at it with. I kind of like, I don't know what your writing process is like, but I imagine that you obsess over your word selection and that you practice it pretty carefully. And you can jump in anytime, but one thing that I want to say is like, this joke that you start off with, almost every set I've seen you do, you start off with, I'm a trans man, which means I was born a woman. And then you say,
and now fill in the blank.
And now fill in the blank. And that joke has grown on me because that word selection of born a woman is really funny, right? Because it's like, you weren't born a woman. That doesn't like this is much as I wasn't born a man. I was like born this little, pink baby, you know? and so like, there's something subversive about the way you set that up. Anyways,
Thank you for catching that. Like, I feel like no one would ever catch that because I think it's like absurd, right? That like people would be like, you were born to be, you're born a woman. And I'm just like, what does that even mean? Like, we were born like a little like lump without a neck. Like, I just, you know,
totally.
like, what do you do?
Can't even hold your head up, you know? But yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, so you said thank you for catching it, but I think I had to hear it like 8 times before I was like, oh,
There's a part of that.
He did this on purpose.
Yeah.
like, yeah, okay. That's pretty good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I'm right there with you. I think that like, I mean, first of all, I'm just kind of like addicted to comedy. Like I just totally fell in love with it, fell in love with the community, fell in love with the craft of it, fell in love with just like getting out and like laughing and like going out as laughing as an activity. And I think that just so quickly it became such an obvious tool. So like I said, like I work in education and I work in like higher ed, and I also work in curriculum development for like allyship curriculums for companies and sports teams and things like that. So I spend a lot of time trying to get people to not be assholes, right? And like teaching people how to not be a dick. And like, sorry, that was
no, we can swear. I'll put a little disclaimer on the front of this one.
But yeah, I just spent a lot of time trying to teach people how to like not be, you know, awful to one another. And
you know, that appeals to me, right? Because one of my favorite jokes is like I do this thing about I'm just really trying not to be a dick.
I love that bit. It's like such a good bit for a white man to do. Like that's another thing, right? Is like it's such a great perspective to have from a group that's kind of like historically, you know, like classically just like that is the dicks. MO, right? It's just we're being dicks. Yeah. So like I think that is a big part of my world. And then I just started doing comedy, and just so quickly it became just so apparent that like it felt like I was waving a magic wand over people. Like it literally felt like witchcraft, because I mean, a great example was literally a show that you had me on in Niwot, and
the bookstore or the bar?
I think it was the bar. Yeah. And afterwards I think it was a fine set. I think I did okay. And afterwards I had a couple, you know, kind of older dudes come up to me, and they were super complimentary of the set. They said they enjoyed themselves so much. And like one of them kind of waited to like kind of talk to me a little bit more one-on-one, and just was really vulnerable with me, and was just like, you know, like I really have not been, you know, like supportive of like this whole, you know, LGBTQ thing.
All this stuff, like I can't stop from coming.
Yeah, exactly. But like, you know, you really made me think about things, or like, you know, I think that like I feel a little bit differently now. And like, and I've just the vulnerability of people kind of admitting that like their minds are in some way changed. I had a similar thing at Vision Quest, where someone who was in support of the drag bans in like Tennessee and across the states then realized that vicariously like that type of ban would also prevent me from going on stage. And then was very, you know, suddenly quite opposed to this, to this policy. And so, I mean, and these are 5-10 minute sets.
Yeah.
You know, I spent 5 minutes, 10 minutes telling jokes, and suddenly, you know, someone that, you know, how many arguments online could you have possibly had that never would have changed your mind? How many classes could I have made? How many hours could I have poured into a lecture at them? But I told them 5 minutes of jokes, and suddenly they're like, oh, you know, I kind of want to be that dude's friend.
I really love that anecdote about the bar, because that was actually kind of a rough evening, because it was like the Denver Nuggets playing the NBA Finals.
That's right. That's always tough on a game day.
So like the place was half empty, you might say. It was half full, which was great. But I'm glad to hear that you had a nice conversation with. I bet they were the 2 guys sitting up in the front.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I talked with them too. They were sweet. Yeah, I have a bunch of stuff loaded up in my brain that I want to ask you about. Let's see if I can get it to come out. Tell me about your first experience getting up telling jokes.
Oh my gosh,
How did it go?
How did it go? So, this was actually, okay. So like, just going to be really transparent here. During the early parts of my like medical transition, so being on testosterone and kind of socially getting more masculine as well. And so it was kind of a toss up if I was perceived as like, you know, like a man or a woman or whatever.
Yeah. And
that was like, that was just tough. It's just a tough time. And, during that time, I really relied on comedy to like give me some sense of relief after a long like shift and a long day. And I wasn't doing comedy. I was just listening. And one of my favorite comedians was Dave Chappelle. And this was right around the time that Dave Chappelle came out with like, you know, this classic, you know, special that really, really was ragging on trans people. And I just was like, it's not like I was mad. I just was so sad. I was just so sad because I really put this person on a pedestal and was just like, you are like the smartest person I knew that I could, you know, like, and so like, why can't you, like, you're so insightful about so many different ridiculous parts of life.
And how many times I've just laughed with his comedy.
Right.
He's so funny.
Such a brilliant, a brilliant actor, a brilliant comedian, a brilliant writer. And I was just so sad. And like, I kind of got, you know, frustrated with it because I was like, you know, I am making trans jokes about my life. Like, my life feels ridiculous all the time. Yeah. How can we not come up with a better joke? And so I just was like, you know what if I try to write a better joke, you know, and which sounds absurd, right? Like, who could write a better joke than like Dave Chappelle? Not many people. Right. And I was determined to do it. And so I was traveling around a little bit at the time and just being in my early 20s and having nothing figured out. And I was in Atlanta, and Atlanta was really popping off with like stand-up comedy. And so it was my birthday, and I was really determined to try to do this. And so I went to some like smoky pub in like a rainstorm on my birthday. Oh my God. And I'm like,
you brought some friends with you?
No.
No. Oh my God.
And I, you know, was determined to do it. And so I'm like there, and I pass as a white man. So people just think that I'm kind of like maybe gay, you know, we definitely give a not very heterosexual vibe. But I think that was all people would assume. And I was late on the list, and there were just, I mean, at least like 8 or 9 comics that went up before me that all had like really brutal trans jokes that were kind of not necessarily jokes that are more just like, and if I find a trans person, I'm going to kill them in the parking lot. And so I'm sitting there going to be like, just thinking like, oh my God, I'm going to get shot in the parking lot. Like, this is like, okay. But also I'm very stubborn. And so I was like, well, we have committed to doing this and we're not backing out now. And so I go on stage, and they're 5-minute sets, and I like do kind of, in some ways, a very rudimentary version of one of my like A sets that you've seen a couple times now. And just start out and just, I'm really forthright with it. It's really, you know, hi, my name is Ren and I am trans, which means, you know, I was born a woman, and now, you know, people ask me if I have a dick all the time, or like, some, you know, whatever. Right. And people just really liked it. People really liked it. It was really odd. Like, they were a little hesitant to laugh, and then they were kind of surprised at themselves for like laughing at some of the jokes. Felt really powerful. It felt really good. Obviously, there's nothing like that little, you know, adrenaline, oxytocin rush. And I get off stage, and the next comedian that goes up goes, hey man, I just got to ask, you know, when you're, because I talk a lot about like penis prosthetics in my content, and he was asking like, so, you know, when you're like shopping for a day, is it like a Sears catalog? You can get like circumcised or uncircumcised. And I was like, yes, like literally that is correct. And it just really shifted the entire dynamic of the room, because suddenly we were making trans jokes that were kind of accurate to the experience of it and not like rude. It wasn't, that question wasn't rooted in, you know, well, trans people shouldn't exist. It was rooted in, oh my gosh, we have Sears catalogs for dicks now. I didn't know that. That's amazing. Right. And so many comedians came up to me afterwards to just tell me how much they enjoyed the content. And
any apologies for bad?
No,
bad
I mean, not
jokes?
really. I mean, people were, it was odd.
That's
like,
unlikely. Yeah.
It was like interesting. I could tell that they were like more excited to learn a new tactic than they were in trying to put that energy in like being apologetic or you know what I mean? And to me, that's better, right? Because you want to learn. And it was amazing. And then we had a plague, and I spent that entire pandemic writing content, not knowing if it was funny, kind of testing it out, having, you know, I was working in the essential industries.
So what year was this? 2019 when you started?
Yeah, like
when you got up your first time?
Yeah, and then it was 2020.
So that happened to me too. I had my first open mic in December of 2019.
Yep.
And then I probably did 8-10 open mics before March hit. and then I was just like cut off. I was like,
Yep.
and I felt like it was like going cold turkey, because you talked about like the adrenaline rush. Like there's an aspect of, one reason I do comedy is because you get an adrenaline rush. It's like it's a good thing for adrenaline junkies without hurting your body, basically. And
just your ego.
Yeah, exactly. Just your ego, which can hurt pretty hurt more than your body. Actually, this one time early on, this guy that was running the open mic I was going to, he said that his dad was a race car, boxcar driver. Did races until he discovered stand-up comedy, and then he was like, "Oh no, this is better." Forget the race car driving. So that's totally like.
I used to be a whitewater raft guide. I was a commercial whitewater raft guide for like almost 9 years.
Yeah.
So yes,
exactly.
Correct.
Yeah. So this is kind of adjacent to the notion of doing this for adrenaline, but I think you'll appreciate this. Actually, the thing that pops up surfaces for me is our comedian colleague Israel has this joke where he talks about how he comes out as bisexual and a comedian on the same day to his mom.
I love that joke.
Which I love that joke too. But it appeals to me because like there's a certain kind of baggage that goes with coming out as a comedian. And people are like, oh, you must be so brave, and I'm like, I was going to be like, fuck you.
You just gave me such a good idea for a joke, Philip. I have to write this down.
Good.
That's amazing. Yes. Yes, I completely agree.
It's like, I was just thinking on the way here, it's like you don't come out as trans because you're brave, Am I right? That's not the motivation for
it's
it.
interesting. Yeah. It's interesting. So I after the pandemic, quote unquote, after the pandemic, I like wasn't necessarily going to go back and like do I wasn't planning on like going back and doing comedy. It wasn't like I spent the whole pandemic itching to get back out there because I wasn't really like in it yet. I just had kind of dipped my toes in. And then, content warning, Club Q happened, and we had a really tragic shooting of a queer nightclub in Denver during a like comedic drag not in Denver, in Colorado Springs, during like a comedic like drag performance. And we lost some amazing people.
People you knew?
And
sorry.
And like, thanks. I think that like just the whole community felt it too, because like even for homies that didn't know a lot of those people, they like were 2 degrees of separation away, and there was this odd like thread that snapped in my brain after that. And because there was this, the trans community is really tight on the internet. Everybody's pretty well connected. And there was a lot of messaging out there about, just people trying to keep each other safe and being like, please stay in and like, don't go out. And like, if you're going out, like take these things with you and like be on the lookout for these, like kind of signs of danger, if you will, and to just kind of caution people to be careful. Not to say we shouldn't have done that. I think that was the right thing to do. I also was so mad about it. I was so irate that, you know what I mean? Like that we were kind of asking ourselves to go back in the closet for like safety, and not to like say that, we shouldn't do that. I do that often, right? I will often just not say I'm trans because I'm like, well, we don't need to have that conversation with these people right now. But like at the same time, there was just, especially on such a large, like statewide scale in such a public way, and a thread just snapped, and I was like, I'm going to go on stage and I am going to literally like yell about being trans from the rooftops, because like, you can't scare us back into not being here, and like, it was just really impactful. And it was also like odd and kind of, it was just a very scary time. And so it was a really, it was very much an act of like resistance to get back up and try again. And, to do so when it was like, thanks, dog.
Thank you for resisting. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I just think it was important too, because it's like, there's all these other little like baby queer people out there, that are just coming out. And then I don't just even mean like kids. I just mean like literally, like you can kind of figure out what your identity looks like at any time in your life, right? And so we have like people that are just at the beginning of like coming out, or just at the beginning of transitioning, or just at the beginning of thinking maybe this is an identity that fits me, even though it's kind of a rocky path, you know? And if there's no one out there like saying I'm this way and it's okay, and I'm this way and guess what, I'm like fucking happy about it, or like I'm this way and you know I'm really here to like just be me, right? And I'm not gonna let other people scare me into like conforming, you know? I think that that's so critical, and so that was like what really jumped me back into gear. So
you are so brave.
So like I think that there's like some context where it's just like absolutely like brave, and then there's other contexts where I'm just like, girl, I'm just trying to like buy some groceries, like,
totally,
you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's an aspect of it. I always, when people say that, I want to be like, no, I don't do comedy because I'm brave. I do it because I think I'm funny. You know, like
that's also why.
Yes. And you know, I want to make people laugh, and it's fun making people laugh. But yeah, there is it is difficult to get up on stage and do a set of jokes, and with the added context that you just outlined, it's like it's amazing, and I think I really admire you for what you do. It's
thank you.
It's really cool.
Babe.
But more importantly, you're very funny, and
thank you. We try.
It's super fun to watch you perform. I hope there'll be a lot more opportunities soon. Are there more things coming up for you? Like what's coming up?
Yes. So there's a couple cool things on just kind of the personal front. I'm getting to go on tour in 2024, which I'm like so excited about.
Whoa.
Yes. Yeah. And
okay, cool.
In like February, March, I'll be hopping all over the US, which is really cool. But before then, the big project that I'm working on right now, which I'm really excited about, is an arts fundraiser. It's called Housing for the Homies. And it is, though we are not providing direct housing assistance, disclaimer, we are actively trying to fundraise for different nonprofits in Denver and like kind of the wider Colorado Front Range area that focus on homeless services. This year, we're really trying to focus on harm reduction. So everything that we raise from the series of shows that we're doing in January is going to be donated to the Harm Reduction Action Center of Denver, which awesome. I think is really a critical step in trying to get people like a sustainable like housing situation in order to kind of receive that. We also need to receive community care. So that's the goal. It was really cool. I like kind of put out a call for performers, just being like, hey, if you want to volunteer your time, I really do try to pay people whenever I do like a thing. But for this one specifically, just trying to get it out there. Like if you want to volunteer time, that would be great. We had almost like, I think 35 different performers, comedians and burlesque dancers and like live painters. And I mean, just all sorts of folks that are really gung ho about doing it. We have 2 shows in Denver, 1 show in Boulder, and one show in Fort Collins each week of, so 4 shows total, 1 like every week in January. And awesome. The goal is to raise $10,000 for harm reduction. For harm reduction.
That's amazing. Thank you for doing that. Cool. Yeah. Well, we'll put the links to those in the show notes. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if anyone's ever read the show notes for this podcast, but
I read Philip. I care.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I had a couple other threads that got lit up while you were talking earlier. Let's see if I can recover what they are. Do you have anything on your mind you want to follow up on?
I guess one thing that I just feel is like related to kind of the podcast, like actual topic and not just like, hee, this is why comedy is so important, which it is. But
okay, let's get serious.
The serious part of it. So I'm originally from West Virginia, not Colorado. So, not necessarily like, actually a full on Coloradan, but I've been here for going on 6 years now. And, I think that I've really enjoyed like listening.
Can I say something about that? I feel like our state song opens with "He was born in the summer of his 27th year."
Oh wow! Wow, that's so funny.
I feel like if you get here before 27, like you're a Coloradan.
That's so funny. I literally just turned 27 like last week. So I'm like, wow, that's so on. Philip, you're so on brand. That's so funny. I was like, the West Virginia state song is, the West Virginia hills, how majestic and Hugh Grant. We could do the full song. But I moved here and housing has like been an odd thing in my life for sure, and like has certainly been a little bit interesting looking since I moved to Colorado. This is actually the first year in Colorado that I've lived in an apartment, and before then when I was in West Virginia, I like kind of was in a couple of apartments, and then I was doing a lot of whitewater rafting, and so it was very cost effective, if you will, to live in a tent while you were like doing that work. Wow. And dirt bagging it a little bit. Fortunately, I had like some really good community as well in that, and so I was not necessarily in dire straits in the same way, but still also like couldn't exactly afford an alternative. Yeah. And then saved up a bunch of money, working really hard, moved out here, and lived in a school bus for a little less than a year. Then moved into a van so I could be a little bit more mobile. Lived like up the mountain and did that until this past year. Okay. It is so difficult to not just like maintain like regular housing in Colorado, but also like if you are in any way trying to like live in an alternative way, or, you know, just live within kind of like your means, right? Yeah. It's really a difficult thing. And like, especially in Boulder, like I just think that like, right. Especially like if I'm on this podcast to have like the airtime to say it, just the like sheer restrictions around, you know, where you can and cannot exist in public space, especially without spending money, is so frustrating. I would pay for parking and still get kicked out. I would, you know, like I would pay to rent out like smaller spaces, like an office space, so that I would have a space to actually like do work, even if I couldn't afford like a space, you know, that was open 24/7 that I could sleep in as well. At least I would have kind of half the day covered. Also got kicked out, you know, just because like there is a van like present, right? Yeah. Not even looking sketchy, not doing anything. I'm literally just like working my day job, just trying to get by, right? And I think that a huge thing that goes unnoticed within people that are experiencing homelessness or actively struggling with housing is that like so many of us work. Like we're like so many of the people that I know that have struggled with housing are full-time workers plus, you know, like working multiple jobs, just trying to kind of get through. And so there's still yet an odd like stereotype around people that like are not necessarily working. And that's part of the reason why they like can't make it happen here. The cost of living is so high, and then on top of that you're taking like there's often like the option taken away from people for whatever shelter is in their means, and often that looks like cars, right? Yeah. And you can't like park overnight, you got to keep moving, you can't like, even if you're paying for parking, you got to leave, you know, there's a lot of spaces where that is just not even like an option, where you just like can't park at all in general, or these parking limits that are you can only be here for 30 minutes. You can only be here for 2 hours. Sometimes you can't even make it those full 2 hours. Sometimes I would be parked in like the Whole Foods parking lot, just getting dinner. And while I am in grocery shopping for dinner, I would get like a ticket on my car, you know? And like, so there's just
is that because your van was known as one that would loiter?
Yeah, exactly. Because it looks like a big white van.
Yeah. So anywhere you went, the police kind of know, oh, there's that van again.
Bingo.
Let's go give it a ticket.
Right. But it's like there's you know, how many Ford Transits are there on the road? Like a million, right? And so that's like frustrating and difficult. And then you're kind of forcing people to live into even smaller means and spaces, right? Which is why a lot of people will take something more stealthy, like a Subaru that's like really, you know, like a beat up Subi is like not going to get as much attention as like, you know, just kind of even a van of the same size.
Wow. Well, I had no knowledge of your personal journey to get housing. Like that's really amazing. Well, one of the things that raises for me is, you know, in theory, Boulder is so inclusive. You know, we have progressive politics kind of written into our city ordinances, and we march for LGBTQ June Pride parades, and you know, like in theory, we're very inclusive, you know, but in practice, we exclude people through a housing market that's just totally distorted to favor single-family homeowners,
right?
And it's a shame to me, because I feel like on two levels. One is that like city council declared us a sanctuary city 10 years ago, for undocumented workers, which also feels like a useless rubber stamp in some ways. I know it's not. I mean, I know that's a meaningful thing for some people, but there's an aspect of it where it's like we're not a sanctuary city in like the full meaning of the phrase, like right. And I would love for Boulder to be a place where queer people could show up and be like, I can't live in West Virginia anymore because like they don't want me there. Right. I'm not sure if that was why you left West Virginia, but
the government certainly doesn't. But I would say the people are surprisingly accepting. But yes, no, I completely agree with you. I think that there is a lot of it's hard, right? Because we can talk about policy as the day is long. I think that in general, as someone that like does a little bit of work in policy, or at least tries to kind of be somewhat, aware of it, it's pretty optimistic being in Boulder in some ways because like, right, you're pushing for something that feels pretty progressive. You have a really good shot at it. That's not necessarily the case in most other counties, even in this state, much less like states that are a little bit more conservative. I think that what really then comes into play is the, like, whether, we're able to acknowledge it in theory or in practice, that all of the other isms, right? Like racism is going to be worsened and amplified by classist structures, right? Yeah. Similarly with like homophobia, transphobia, that is going to be worsened by classist structures because we know that the comorbidity of income disparity, food scarcity, medical care, right? Just comprehensive medical care. Those things are just significantly like not in the favor of especially like QTPOC people, right? Queer trans people of color. That's like I'd say like the big one for me if I was like to pinpoint a piece of like where I think the activism is most needed. And if we're not willing to create spaces, especially free spaces, publicly funded spaces, that are accessible to everyone, despite like, whatever class they're coming from, whatever income level they're coming from, then like we're not actually creating spaces for like diversity, right? Yeah. We're not creating spaces for those diverse groups because they're going to have those struggles and they're going to have these needs that then, right, like white upper middle class families are not necessarily facing throughout a lot of their lives. And they're not necessarily having to face with their families currently. And, I think that where we get into kind of trouble when we talk about this and I've seen it in like committee, right? With like bills trying to get passed through the committee in like Denver even, is this concept of kind of it's like a I call it a privilege pissing match. It's which is kind of oddly what it is, right? Where, we'll try to, discredit someone drowning in a bathtub because, I know someone that's drowned in the Arctic Ocean, right? It doesn't really work that way. Like everyone's just actually drowning. Yeah. That's the problem, right? And so I think that similarly, it doesn't necessarily matter what the circumstances were that like led to someone being in a position of like facing struggles that blatantly lower classes, quote unquote, are like going to face, that people that are in kind of a like lower status of like income or, whatever, like it doesn't matter if it was addiction. It doesn't matter if it was a medical crisis. It doesn't matter if they got kicked out of their house because they were queer. Like these people all deserve care. These people all deserve spaces that they can be. And it's hard to exist in a space in Boulder without paying money. I'd say that the public library is one of the few spots here that is accessible to people without the obligation, without the expectation of spending any money or needing to kind of check a certain box. So, I'm not saying I have like all the secrets to, fixing like, right, the homeless problem, but I certainly think that, at least allowing alternative ways to occupy space for free, whether that's in your own car or that's because we're publicly funding other opportunities and spaces and services for people, that's what it looks like to me.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think about these issues in terms of like expanding access to housing and having all different kinds of housing, single room occupancy, cooperative living arrangements. I don't normally think, oh, we need more public spaces so people can sleep overnight without being molested. That kind of like causes some friction in my brain, you know. But I think what you said is really profound and really important. That like we have these ways of explaining away what people are going, the way we see people suffering, and then we think, well, they're making a mess. Right. We should just outlaw this and push them aside, instead of like thinking about how to not harm them, like the whole harm reduction thing, which I know is a lot more complicated than the simple phrase of it, but keeping people alive for starters, is an important step to, I'm not trying to be funny. It's kind of so awful that it's like,
I think that it's necessary to be able to kind of like even in some ways like laugh about the ridiculousness of it, because to me that's a huge part of it. I mean, the sheer concept that like, right, we could be talking at like city council about like, do we or do we not build a tiny home community, and there's so many like nuanced things about that, and like whether you're pro or against it. I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, that's great, right? It's literally 20 degrees outside, it's November, people are like dying in the street. So like we could start with something there, and then work towards these longer term solutions that, are worthy of debate and are worthy of like, greater input from the community. So yeah, I think that there's like a lot there too. It's also really interesting in just kind of tying this into comedy a little bit. I think that the comedy community is oddly intertwined with kind of like houselessness and homelessness. Because first of all, we're occupying interesting spaces for somewhat free, basically. Yeah. Sometimes there's like a 1 or 2 drink minimum, but even then it's like, oftentimes you're just allowed in the space, you're just allowed to come in the space to be warm, to try out new jokes, to kind of be a bit ridiculous. And that is a little bit more of an open, accepting space of folks in general.
It's funny
right?
that I hadn't thought about that, because I actually show up at Vision Quest, and I don't really like drinking on Thursday nights. And so they don't make a lot of money from me, to be honest. But I walk in and I spend time there, and I'm in a place where people are talking and visiting and connecting, and
an open mic has like an open door, right?
That's right.
And that's like a big part of it. And that's true across cities and all over the country. Yeah. And so we're seeing, and then also we just have, I think that in some ways this goes without saying, but is worth mentioning. There's a huge portion of the professional comedy community, like people that do this professionally, get paid for this, they do shows, like it is real work, right? It is so fun. And I can talk about how fun it is as the day is long, but also you have to show up, you got to show up on time, you got to be prepped and have your stuff ready, and you got to stay there and network and maybe help clean up, and it's a job. And there's a huge portion of comedians that are actively experiencing like housing struggles, partly because they are committed to doing comedy, or that, right?
Like there's a transient aspect to that.
Exactly.
To that career for one thing.
100%. So I think that that's certainly a piece of it that is like up for viewing, and also why I think it's so beautiful that I see so many comedians really, really willing to jump in and provide services for free for a benefit like Housing for the Homies, where we're trying to fundraise some money to help out the community in that way, because we're seeing it firsthand in a way that not necessarily everyone else that's like going out on the Thursday night is, so yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. I thought of a thread from that surface from earlier, but it's not really related to what you were just saying.
Bring it. Give me a hard left. Left.
Well, but it does pertain to some things you were saying earlier. One of the ways I think about the way I walk through the world, like whether I'm at work and I decide to ask a question that is going to expose my ignorance. For example, I could ask the person that I know will have the answer, or I could ask it on a channel where other people will see that I didn't know the answer to that, and they can benefit if they didn't know it too. You know, like there's a kind of aspect, and I've had this modeled for me by different people throughout my life, to like the way you behave and the way you present yourself gives other people permission to do what they're doing, you know? And so like one of the reasons I do comedy is because I want more comedians. I want more comedy. Mm-hmm. I want to give you permission to do comedy by showing you my vulnerabilities, you know? And I want to live in a community where there's like live entertainment. You know, I walk out my door, like I've sometimes joked I want to live on a college campus, like for adults, you know, like I walk out my door and I run into people. I find out about live events. I find myself having a meal with people I didn't know before, or people I'm reconnecting with. And like, I want to live in a community where like, it's not all so structured and like everything's driven by calendars and by driving every fucking where. And, you know, I ride my bike everywhere. This is probably painfully obvious, but, yeah. And so like, part of the reason I do comedy is because I want there to be comedy in the world. And I want my peers and other people who see me to be like, oh, that dingbat's doing comedy. I could do comedy.
Totally,
you know?
Yes. And I literally said this to someone who was at Vision Quest this past week, and she's a comedian, but she was just watching and was like, I don't know if I should get back up there, and like kind of having that internal debate that we will often have after we have a bad set. And I was like, look, girl, like, you know what? At the end of the day, if you don't take that spot, some mediocre white man's absolutely going to take it for you. And so you should get up there, if nothing else, to not let them do that. And you know what I mean? We should have that other content. And she was like, you know what? You're right. And I was like, there it is. So yes, I completely agree with that.
I even want the mediocre white men to
I agree. Yes.
You know, like, because actually there's someone in particular I'm thinking about who got up for the first time recently and bombed so hard. And then got up a few weeks later and had some success. It wasn't like he nailed it, but like he got up and connected in a way where you could tell when he got off, he was a little bit lighter than when he got on, you know? Yeah. And so that's I want that for everybody.
No,
you know?
I completely agree. And I think that
I'm not trying to say all lives matter. You know, like, that's not what I mean. But it's like, but yeah, I mean,
no, I completely agree with you though. And I also think that like, you know, at first glance, like I too am a mediocre white man, right? And so then there's also like, you know, different parts of my life that I'm really excited to be vulnerable about. You know, some of which we talked about today, right? And you know, being trans is just one of them, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that that is a really powerful tool in combating, especially like toxic masculinity and like kind of the frame of like, you're not allowed to tell people what's wrong with you, or you're not allowed to really like talk about that. And you're certainly not allowed to make light of it. And you're absolutely not allowed to have feelings about it. And so like, you know, I think that, you know, getting up on stage and talking about it and having feelings about it and being open about it and even being willing to be wrong about it in front of other people, it really allows other people that, you know, the permission to be vulnerable.
Yeah, actually, this touches on something that really irritates me, and that is, you know, this seems to be a problem everywhere I've gone, and it's not like I've performed all over the country or anything like this, but like I've been to a few different spots, and there's always like some white guy who gets up and tries to like thread the needle on a racist joke, you know, or a misogynistic joke, and he thinks he's just doing it the right way, and he's totally like way over here, you know, like, and I'm like, oh my God, and those guys kind of piss me off because they're the reason like I don't drag my wife out to open mics, you know, because it's like 100%. It's you know, there's a lot of people that don't feel comfortable when some white guy gets up and starts making jokes about like slavery or like you know, there's all kinds of, we don't have to enumerate them here. I don't want people to flee the podcast because I start you know, itemizing them, but yeah, it's like there's a duality. There's a kind of a tension with comedy in the comedy community about bringing people in and letting it all hang out. But then letting it all hang out is gross, you know, and it pushes other people away. So it's like, it's like, how do you get how do you make it feel welcoming to most people?
Totally. That's a great question. I think that there's a couple ground rules that I always like to kind of put, especially if I'm like running an event or especially running an open mic.
Yeah.
Because I love when people try out new content. I think it's beautiful. I think it's raw. I think it's so important to be like willing to try out new content, because like none of us, me, you, Dave Chappelle included, have yet to write our funniest joke, right? And that is like the optimism with which we should approach new content. However, I think that like, right, how do we do that without being like horrible people if we like are trying to touch on something that might be really sensitive, right? And I think the biggest rule is only use your slurs. I should not be using slurs that do not pertain to me. I should not be using slurs that pertain to.
It's kind of a narrower version of no punching down.
Exactly. And I think that no punching down feels a little bit ethereal for people.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we don't notice that we're privileged in a certain way, or sometimes we don't, notice that an isolated opinion about, well, I hated this one person and they just happen to be a woman, then translates when you're saying that joke on stage to like, I hate women, which isn't okay. And happens, right? It happens accidentally because people are trying to figure out how to say it in a funny way.
Yeah, I've had jokes where I developed a female protagonist and realized, why did I choose a female here? Like I could have just put a male in this in the same position, and then it's more like it's me in the thing. And so like, it's kind of a weird.
It's interesting. I also will catch myself doing that sometimes. And I've been really actually trying to, unless it is like very much pertinent to the story. So I have a couple stories that are like restroom oriented and specifically about being in like a men's restroom with other like men, that are
at the truck stop.
Correct. Exactly. So, unless it is quite gender specific for a purpose, I exclusively use they in my acts when I'm talking about, I heard someone on the radio and they said this thing, and you know what? No, not a single person has ever once commented on like the joke not making sense or them getting lost or thinking I was talking about multiple people. Most people don't even notice that I do it. And so I think that there is a beautiful challenge there in like encouraging comedians to kind of in some ways neutralize the content. And sometimes that actually makes the joke more accessible.
This reminds me of something I wanted to call you out on, or
oh my God, please, yes.
Not call you out.
Call me out, Phil.
No,
call me out.
It's more about compliment you on. One thing that you do really well that I love about your sets is that you'll drop into this, because you said you were an educator, which actually makes sense. You'll drop into like for 2 sentences, you'll drop into like this very pedantic, I'm explaining to you how this works right now. And I love those moments because I know something great is about to show up, whenever you do that. And I'm trying to think of an example of that. Oh shoot! Well, I'd probably just spoil one of your jokes.
No, by all means. I'm sure. Well, I'm sure all of my fans listen to every podcast that I'm featured on. My wide array of fans. They're just other Denver comedians. That's it. No, I think that. One that comes to mind is once again hashtag penis prosthetics. There's several penis prosthetics that I'll try to explain. Be like, does anybody here know what this is? And the answer is almost always no one does. Yeah. And so then I get to be like, amazing. So this specific thing serves this very simple purpose in this very specific way. And then I try to like make it so mansplainy that it's funny.
Yeah,
and then
exactly. Because what you're doing is you're bringing everyone along at the same time that you're kind of like poking fun at the fact that you have to explain it.
Right.
And I just think that's really wonderful because you've actually done that for me several times where you're actually bringing me along. I'm over here scratching my head and then you do it in the mansplaining way. And it's like, oh yeah, I can laugh about the fact that I didn't understand that before.
Right.
And it's funny. And I think it's beautiful.
Thank you.
The way you set up your humor that way.
I appreciate that.
So.
I think that once again, it's like comedy it's the easiest way to educate people.
Yeah.
And so often as the educator, you will have to make fun of yourself to do it and to get into that space. And so if I'm just preaching at people in like too genuine of a way, then they're going to be like, I don't really need this right now. But like, if I do it because I'm making fun of me as the teacher in that teacher role or voice or character, like then suddenly it's easier to absorb, right?
This is actually kind of painful for me because when I start talking about housing policy or like how I think progressive politics ought to work, I get super pedantic, and I'm not funny at all. And I don't even know how to marry these two aspects of my brain. And like, really, I've really just tried to, like, when I do comedy, set all that stuff aside and show up and just try to be funny. And like, if I can figure that out, maybe I'll try to marry these things. I don't know if you've ever heard me like try to do housing policy jokes or like I did a homage to Black History Month back in February. I don't know if you came to that one or not, but it's so tough, and I'm just punting on that for now. Like I don't really feel like I'm trying to teach anybody anything.
Mm-hmm.
And
I disagree.
That's why I admire. Well, okay, let me just say this. I really admire the way that you are bringing people along and changing hearts and minds in the way you do comedy. And I'm just struggling to get people to laugh. like that's like, I feel like that's my goal, right now. But yeah, please disagree with me on that.
That was precious. Also, like, but can you? I was like, can I have that on my Wikipedia page? What you just said right there, like changing hearts and minds with comedy. I was just like, is this a New York bestseller like summary right now? This
All right, I'm sorry. Maybe it's time to
I'm flattered.
cut this short.
No, but I think that kind of calling back to one of the jokes that we talked about at the beginning of this show, this podcast, was you have a joke that's like specifically about being, I'm just trying to not be an asshole. And I think that it's like, so like that in and of itself is a way of showing a way of being, right? It's a way of exempling a behavior that we kind of just really desperately need all white men in the world to adopt right now. And I'm just trying to not be an asshole. And like, I think that you do it in such a funny way, and that it is like it is both like obvious and then also hard to see, right? Because like that's like what privilege is, that's what identity is, that's what like like a lot of like classism is structured around of. It is like really obvious and then also so hard to see. And so when you're able to catch that in your comedy, I think that that's some of the bigger jokes that I hear you get. And I think that it's truly inspiring, because then you're like, I'm also just like, yes, it's such a reprieve from like this white dude who's too cool who's going to tell kind of a racist joke, And so it's so nice.
I'm going to make anal sex funny today.
Exactly. Today's the day. Today's the day.
Oh, man. Yeah, I've got another joke where I talk about taking attention meds. And it's, I think of that as like a thing that lots of people, my peers and my demographic, struggle with, is that they're on some kind of medication that they feel bad. They don't want people to know about, and then there's like, no, I'm hunky dory. Like everything's cool. We're all, I'm housing secure. Like, never mind that, like my mortgage and my payments, if I miss a month of work or whatever, and something I was thinking about earlier when you were talking about how vulnerable BIPOC QT folks are, and a lot of people in the queer community. There's this aspect that people who don't have those kind of vulnerabilities, I feel like they're kind of hostile to seeing other people's vulnerabilities, because like we're all just so exposed. Like we're all just these Homo sapiens on the planet who can get struck down by cancer or a truck or whatever at any time. But not only that, but it's like it seems like only the multimillionaires feel secure in their housing and their financial situation. Even they are like, they never stop, they just keep going. And then so there's like a huge portion of us, we all feel insecure, and we all feel vulnerable to the economy shifting or to health conditions changing, all kinds of personal things that can go on. And so part of the reason I want to make the world safer and more inclusive for BIPOC, for LGBTQ, is so that we can all just like feel okay. I'm doing it again. I'm like,
I'm so right with you. And like, I think that what you're really kind of referencing is more over a cultural side of universal design, right? Which is, we know that for universal design, right? A great example is like curb cuts, classic, right? Literally called the curb cut effect, right? If you design something for, especially groups with different like mobility or disability issues, then like suddenly it's better for everyone, right? Curb cuts aren't just great for people with wheelchairs. They're great for that lady with a stroller, and they're great for that construction worker with, who's like wheeling across some equipment. They're great for everyone, right? And I think that you're speaking of that in a more like kind of cultural way, right? Which is that if
Curb cuts for everybody.
Bingo, if we have systems in place, if we have literally built into the infrastructure of the way that our town works, the way that our like city governance works, the way that our housing works, the way the planning for our housing works, or the funds that are kind of channeled into the community, when we change the way that those things operate, so that way we can actually support and assist people that, might just not actually be able to make it up the curb on their own. They might just not be able to take that step in the same way that we can. And that's really almost certainly not their fault, right? And even if it was, we as a society should be kind enough to still yet provide a solution, that we should still be like kind enough to recognize that these things happen for any number of reasons. And so there should be an easier way to take that step into security, into housing, into, a place of being less vulnerable as a group. And so what does that look like? Right. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways that it could look like. And I think that we shouldn't be afraid of
going after them.
Exactly.
Really,
because another one of my favorite examples of universal design that is disagreed upon in some ways is fidget toys. Fidget spinners, fidget toys, little boxes that have the clicks and the buttons and a joystick and et cetera. Not everyone can spin a fidget spinner, right? But almost everyone can find a way to play with some aspect of some sort of fidget toy, right? And I think that that's really amazing. And it serves multiple purposes. It's playful. It helps people with attention. It is kind of therapeutic for a lot of folks. And the sheer variety of having a thing that you could touch, or a thing that you could spin, or a thing that you could click, or a thing that you could whatever, makes it more accessible for more people, right? The variety and the attempt at variety suddenly gives us multiple ways to participate. And so we shouldn't be trying to just aim for the perfect solution is just a curb cut. And, we didn't even actually start implementing that until the 80s. Okay. But it's not about developing the one perfect system that works for everybody as much as it is trying to develop a bunch of different systems that are going to hopefully work for most people. Like everyone can find a way to participate or engage in this. And so, less conversation in just the theory to come up with the most efficient way to solve homelessness or whatever. And moreover, let's just try a bunch of things. And if one starts working really well, then maybe we'll put more attention on it. And if it's not, then we're just going to keep trying stuff.
I love that. On a kind of a personal note, it's kind of cool to hear you just articulate. Like, we've never had a conversation like this before. And it's sort of like, for me, it's kind of moot that you can articulate all these ideas about how we can be culturally more empathetic. Because you're so obviously an empathetic and empath that on stage you connect with people, and it's clear you got a big heart, and so it's fun to hear you geek out on how to change the world, in a kind
likewise. Oh my gosh, it's fun to hear you be because you clearly are a subject matter expert on this, and I so appreciate that you'll even catch yourself being like, here we go, here I go again, and I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, it's funny. I've actually kept these two spheres pretty separate. I don't talk about housing much at open mic night, but I do want to give you a opportunity for any parting shots or raise anything else that might have come up for you.
Good. Yeah. I have a couple things. I will try to keep them brief. First of all, Philip, you're wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on this show.
Yeah, it's been really fun.
And also just for putting in the time to make space to talk about housing in the community. Because I think it's on everyone's mind, and very few people are actually creating space for people to talk about it. So thank you for doing that. Anybody listening, you should try to go to Philip's stand-up. He is incredibly funny. Don't let him fool you. He's actually a very wonderful storyteller. And
Katie, we can clip this part out.
And I think that in general, the only personal plug I'll give is If you are looking for like comedy stuff, if you're looking for ways to support housing in your local community, please try to come out to one of the Housing for the Homies shows. It is in January, Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins. There's something every week. They're on different days, different places. So we would really love to have you. All money is going to be going to harm reduction services. And I think that we have an amazing lineup of performers. And then lastly, Philip, you said something earlier that I thought was just so inspiring, which was, by showing up authentically, we give other people permission to do the same. And it really reminded me of one of my trans icons, Candy Darling, who said, "You must be yourself no matter the cost. It is the highest form of morality." And so I just want to leave on that nice little quote because it was lovely to get to see you be authentically you. It was really wonderful to get to be here and talk about my stuff. And yeah, this was great.
Thank you, Ren Q Da, for being on the podcast. It was just lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Philip.
You bet.
Gonna find me a residential pedestrian district where I can gracefully grow older. Gonna spend my remaining years sharing Boulder.
Thank you for listening to Sharing Boulder. Please support the podcast by sharing it with your friends and neighbors. You can contact me at linktree.com/Philip Ogren, which you can find by searching for Linktree Philip Ogren, or by visiting sharingboulder.us, where you can also find show notes and previous episodes. This episode of Sharing Boulder was produced by Philip Ogren and edited by Catherine Avery. The music was created by Nathaniel Ogren and Sack Lunch. Keep sharing, Boulder.